We're glad you're here this morning, and we're continuing our series on faith that works when life doesn't. James tells us about the great things that God does. And he tells us, we said in Matthew chapter 5, we talked about the thing that God has several names for those who are followers of Jesus Christ. We're called Christians. We're called the firstborn. We're called children of God. We're called all these different things. We're called disciples of Jesus. But again, he said, blessed are the peacemakers, for they are ones that God will call his children. One of the things that we who are Christians, we are called peacemakers. And so we were talking about that from the book of James. And we looked at James chapter 3, 13 through 15, where it says, if you are truly a wise and understanding person. A lot of us would like to think that we're understanding. We'd like to think that we're wise. Well, he says, if you're truly a wise or understanding person, it will be seen in your life by the good deeds that you do out of humility that always comes from wisdom. But if in your heart you are selfish, jealous, or bitter towards one another, don't think you're wise, because it's a lie. That's never wisdom from God. Instead, it's from the world and your unspiritual nature and from the devil himself. Then we said in James chapter 3:16, for whenever there is envy or selfish ambition, you'll always find confusion, unrest, disharmony, rebellion, and every kind of evil. And we looked at that last week. We said real wisdom is pure, then peaceful, then considerate. It is not defensive, full of mercy and helpful, impartial, and free from hypocrisy. When peacemakers plant seeds of peace, they will harvest justice. And again, that's where we looked last week. We said, if you are a peacemaker, there's some seeds that you will plant. And we're looking at 6 seeds. The first seed we said is, if you're wise, I won't compromise the truth. I will tell you the truth. I will tell you the truth, what you need to hear. I won't try to cover things up. I will be truthful to you. I will not be hypocritical towards you. I will tell you the truth. But we also said in Ephesians chapter 4, he says, I will tell you the truth lovingly. A lot of us talk about standing up for the truth, but he says, I will stand up for the truth in a loving way. We said that last week. Then in James chapter 3 verse 17, real wisdom is first of all pure. That's truthful. It's pure. It's going to tell you the truth. Then we said, secondly, if I'm wise, I won't antagonize your anger. I will tell you the truth, but I won't antagonize your anger. And we said in James 3:17, real wisdom is peaceful. I'm not going to antagonize you. I know there's certain topics that I can talk to you about, certain topics that I cannot talk to you about, certain things I'm going to try to stay away from arguments. As a matter of fact, he says in Proverbs 20 and verse 3, any fool can start an argument. Well, we know that. Any fool can start an argument. The wise thing is to stay out of them. That's pretty good. How about this one? Number 3, if I'm wise, I won't minimize your feelings. You know, a lot of times we when we're dealing with people, we think, they feel something about something that maybe it isn't that important to us. We think we don't understand why they feel that way. But we need to be empathetic to people. We need to be sympathetic to people. We need to be able to understand that, just because someone has a fear in a particular place, you might not have that fear. I have a fear that's kind of an odd fear. I don't like bridges, especially when they have the things up. I just don't like bridges. But I have a dear friend of mine who is horribly afraid of bridges. I mean, he's one of my best friends. And we would go on a trip, and we get ready and you could see him white knuckling. And his big fear has always been that you go across a bridge and it'll fail and it'll fall and you'll be killed in that. And you say, well, that's not a rational fear. It may not be it is a rational fear, but I think it is. Mine is not worried about the bridge falling in. Mine's, when you're on a narrow bridge, is either catching the mirror of the guy beside me or catching the side rail on the other side. That's my fear. I'm not worried about the bridge failing. But he's horribly afraid that he goes across the Mississippi River, he's going to wind up in the Mississippi River. By the way, that's also, I'm in good company with my fear there. One of my best friends has it, but also Alexander the Great had that fear. Alexander the Great was so afraid of crossing a bridge, when he would put his foot on that bridge, he would break down crying. Alexander the Great. We would say that's irrational. And it may be. But we need to understand that we need to not minimize someone's feelings, because that is real for them. Isn't that right? You sit in the perfect place. I have a counselor who sits on the front row, so I look over there and make sure I'm getting this right, because every now and again I have to look and she'll go. So I know I'm telling the truth. I try to tell the truth, but sometimes I'm not sure if I'm telling the truth. But if I'm wise, I'm not going to minimize your feelings, because your feelings are real. Real wisdom is considerate. He tells us, consider it being mindful of the feelings of others. Now, you guys, you may not think it's a big deal, to leave your underwear laying on the floor. But your wife, that may bug her to death. The one I can't understand is, women, and this is a big one, is, leaving the toilet seat up. Why is that such a big deal for you women? I don't know. I mean, I had to lift it up. You can at least put it back down. I mean, what's the difference? I don't come in saying, well, why did you leave that down? But it's real. And you guys will be wise to put it down if you want to be considerate. And what I'm saying is, we need to be considerate of how other people feel about that. And that's where we got to last week. Today, let's continue on with number 4. Next, James says is this: if I'm wise in a relationship, I won't criticize your suggestions. James chapter 3 and verse 17, real wisdom is not defensive. Oh man, could we save a lot of problems if we would just do this? The Bible says the fourth thing, real wisdom is not defensive. Now the Greek word here is eupithes, which it's only used one time in the entire Bible. Right here in this verse, James chapter 3:17, it literally means you're open. You're open to suggestions. You're reasonable. The RSV says this: you're open to reason. Real wisdom is open to reason. You're not defensive. The Living Bible says this: wisdom allows discussion and is willing to yield to others. The King James says it this way: is easily entreated. In other words, you'll listen to the ideas of other people. You'll not be defensive when someone comes up with an idea. Now, what does that mean? Again, not being defensive. It means you're reasonable. You're open for discussion. You're willing to be persuaded. A wise person can learn from anybody. A fool shuts down. You're stubborn. You're closed-minded. Nobody, because you're not willing to listen to anybody else because, you're right and that's it. You're not setting on your own biases. As I said, you're not stubborn. That's wisdom. You're willing to listen, and you're willing to learn. And you're a learner, and all learners are leaders. By the way, I think you should always be learning something. I like to learn new things. I've done that. And actually what they suggest is, if you really want to keep a sharper mind as you grow older, that you need to learn something outside your comfort zone. That you need to learn new things. So that's kind of why I got into different things that I have. Of course, one thing is I'm cheap too, and I would go through I got into emergency services. Mark got me into emergency services when I was here the first time. I'll never forget him coming to me and he says, "Are you claustrophobic?" I said, "No, not really." He said, "We need somebody that's small like you." Of course, back then I weighed 135 pounds. He said, "We need somebody small like you to crawl in a hole for a rescue squad." I said, "Well, I could crawl in a hole. Yeah, I could do that." So anyway, I got in the rescue squad. Every time they'd come up with something, they said, "We need somebody to learn something new. We need somebody to," they come up with Swiftwater Rescue. I said, "Well, if you'll pay for it, I'll take it." And so I took Swiftwater Rescue. Then they said, we need somebody to do man tracking. We have a lot of lost people here in Cumberland County. They get lost a lot. There was a call out last night, actually. Before I got out there, he found his way out. But anyway, a lot of lost people. They said, we need somebody who can do man tracking. I said, well, if you'll pay for it, I'll do it. And so I took a man tracking class. Actually, I took an advanced man tracking class. I went to Fall Creek Falls with a bunch of park rangers. I was probably the only rescue squad person there. There was about 100 park rangers. They taught how to use the GPS systems and how to use all the compasses and things of that nature. And it was pretty neat. I spent a week out there. By the way, Fall Creek Falls is tick infested, in case you wondered. I've never seen so many ticks in my life than Fall Creek Falls. It's much worse than here. But anyway, so I said, but if you'll pay for it, I'll take it. And on and on. I went to another place, and it was after Katrina, and the federal government said, we need more ham radio operators. I don't know whether you know this, but I have my ham radio operator license. I said, if you'll pay for it, I'll take it. And so then they said, we need some. I was in Paducah, Kentucky. It has the biggest barge traffic in the world. I don't know whether you ever realize that or not. Paducah, Kentucky has the largest barge traffic in the world, which means they have a lot of water rescue there, which means they have vessels that sink and things like that. We need somebody to do scuba diving. I said, well, if you'll pay for it, I'll take it. So I took it. I took several different classes on that. I took dive rescue, open water, dry suit, all that. First time I ever dove was looking for a truck that someone drove off into the Missouri River, and it's called blackwater diving, where you can't see your finger on your mask. Never forget going down and thinking, this is the first time I ever did it. I'm thinking, why did I do this? And got down there, and it was dark. And I thought, there are 50 policemen standing up there watching me. If I pop up out of that water, they're going to laugh at me. So I laid on the bottom for about 5 minutes. I just laid there. Then I said, okay. There's rebarring everywhere around. I said, okay, I can do this. So I started, and I actually found the truck. But there for a while, I thought, pride wouldn't let me go up. but then I went through and did some other things I've gone through. And again, I got on the fire department. I said, well, if you'll pay for that, I'll take that training. So I've got my firefighter 2 and 1 and 2. And then I've got all these different things that I've done over the years. While I was there, they said, well, we do medical calls. We need an EMT on our trucks. You'll pay for it, I'll take it. And that's how I got to where I am. I'm working EMS a little bit part-time now. But it's learning something new all the time. That's what I'm saying. We need to be open to learning and discussing and doing things. One of the things of wisdom is that you're willing to think new ideas. One of the reasons that I like to go to lectureships, honestly, is not, I go to church lectureships. The reason that I love the lectureships the most is not the lectures themselves. It's the ideas I get when I get there. Of churches trying things. I thought, I love that. I'm going to do that when I get home. I have some people that I run things by with, some preacher friends of mine, that I'll say, I've been thinking about this. What do you think? How do you think we could do this? And we'll bat ideas around. That's what he's talking about there. When someone comes to you with an idea, you don't normally just shut down and say, no, we've never done that before, so we're not going to do it. How many churches of Christ do you know that have that mentality? Well, we've never done that before. And then the next question is, and that will lead to, and rather than saying, you know what? And that's one of the things, by the way, Terry, I loved about our elders now, but especially the elders when I first came here. They were so laid back, but their idea was when deacons had a job to do, that's their job. Don't come to us and ask us. A deacon would come to the elders and say, can we do this? And they say, well, is it in your budget? That's what our elders do now. Is it in your budget? Well, yeah, it is. Well, why did you come to us? Do it. But the philosophy was to say yes to just about everything. Isn't that true? And so that got me in trouble sometimes. But their idea was, yes, if you want to try, well, sure, we'll try it. It may not work, but we'll try it. But they were real positive about saying, you know what, it certainly can't hurt us. If it doesn't work, we'll make adjustments, we'll go along. And that's why we had this building that we're sitting here right now. I don't know whether y'all know it, but when I first came here, we had 120 members. And we're on that little side of that building there. Why do you think we're where we are now? Because somebody listened to some ideas and said, you know what, let's just try something new. Let's do something different. What we're doing is not working for us, so maybe we should try something else. Listening to other people. How in our world today, nobody's listening to anybody else anymore. I mean, this political party isn't listening to this political party, and this rabbit channel on TV is not listening to this rabbit channel on TV. They're all just talking at each other. They're not any reasonable ideas coming out. They're not open. They're defensive. Are you a reasonable person? Let me ask you, can your kids reason with you? Can your wife reason with you? Can your husband reason with you? Are you one of those people that said, don't confuse me with the facts, my mind's made up? Well, if you're going to be wise in a relationship, if you're going to be a peacemaker, you've got to be open to reason. You've got to be open to thinking new ideas. You've got to be willing to think outside the box. Again, I heard about a new preacher, a young guy, just graduated from school, and he started to work at this place, at his first church, and he's very nervous about preaching his very first sermon. So he got up before the congregation. He said, listen, I need your help. I'm really just new at this. I'm getting started. I want your suggestions. I'd like to be open to your suggestions. So what I want you to do, I want you, when you hear my sermon, if you got any positive suggestions you'd like to make for me to do it, I'm open to any advice that you have. Well, at the end of the service, he's standing in the front, shaking hands with people, and they were leaving. A man walked up to him and said, preacher, I just want you to know that sermon stunk. Your sermon stunk. Well, that's not very constructive criticism, but he's trying to be open about it, and so he goes, well, okay, so it stunk. So specifically, how did it stink? The man said, well, there's 3 problems with your sermon. First of all, you read it. Second, you read it poorly. Thirdly, it wasn't really worth reading. The guy was feeling pretty bad after that, and so another member came up later, felt sorry for him, and says, listen, don't worry about that preacher. Don't worry about him. Don't pay any attention to old Jim. Jim just repeats what everybody else is saying. Now, being open means you're not defensive. You don't take everything personally. You don't get offended so easily. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 15. A fool thinks he needs no advice, but a wise man listens to others. You want to be a peacemaker in your home? You want to be a peacemaker at work? You want to be a peacemaker between races and the world? Well, to be wise in relationships, I won't compromise the truth. I won't antagonize your anger. I won't minimize your feelings, and I won't criticize your suggestions. Then number 5. If I'm wise, I won't emphasize your mistakes. If I'm wise in a relationship, I won't emphasize your mistakes. James chapter 3, verse 17. The next phrase says, real wisdom, God's wisdom is full of mercy and it's helpful. It's full of mercy. It's forgiving. It's gracious. It's helpful. Are you quick to point out everything that's wrong in the world? And I believe, people, we talk about using your talents in the church. Everybody's given all these different talents. But I believe some people think that their talents is finding everybody else's mistakes. And of course, some of you are talented at that. I mean, honestly, I remember, I'll just say it. Larry Patterson came to me. And he was saying, you know what, you misspelled this in a bulletin. And I said, Larry, I appreciate that. I did too. I mean, it was, I'm not saying this negative. I said, Larry, honestly, I cannot proof what I write. I can't. Because when I read it like I think I know what I wrote. So if I wrote it, it must be right. So you know what I did? I said, Larry, I'm going to let you take the bulletin. I'm going to send it to you every week, and I want you to do it, fix it for me. And he did. But not only did he do that, he recruited several ladies here in the church that do it now because they're good at doing that kind of stuff. Now, that's not a negative kind of finding corrections. That's not a negative looking for your mistakes. That's a positive one. And I appreciate these ladies that do it. By the way, he took it for about 3 months, and he said, I'm passing it on to them ladies. He might have been smarter than I gave him credit for. But anyway, he you know, that kind of criticism, that's good. That's positive stuff. That's somebody saying, you know what, you did that wrong, but let me help you. I like that. But there are other people who want to criticize you, but they don't have an answer. They can't give you any results. My problem is, number one, if you want to criticize, make sure you're involved. You're not somebody who's just sitting on the sideline there thinking that your place in life is to find out what's wrong with everybody and everything else. Number two, because you got to earn the right. If you're active and you're involved, I'm going to have more of an ear for what you have to say than someone who is from the outside walking in and saying, I don't like you do. But the second thing is don't criticize unless you've got a better way to do it. I like when one guy said, they were doing mission work and all this, and Michael does our mission work, does a fantastic job with our mission work. They came to Michael, maybe they came to somebody like you and said, I don't like the way you're doing mission work. I love this guy's reply. You might want to put this in your notes. And he said, well, okay, what can we do better? I don't know, but I don't like what you're doing. He said, well, you know what? I like what I'm doing a lot better than what you're not doing, so we're going to keep doing what you're. But that's true. People, everybody, they don't like something, but they don't have any idea how to make it better. Well, listen, if you can't come up with a better way, I'd rather mess up trying to do something than not doing anything at all. And there are a lot of people who would rather just not do anything at all. So, make sure that you don't overemphasize people's mistake. It's full of mercy. It's forgiving. It's gracious. Are you quick to point out what's wrong with everybody in your home, at your work, at your church? Do you jump on every mistake and error? Do you feel duty-bound that you have to remind people what doesn't work? Are you picky about everything? Do you bring up the past and go over and over and over? And some guy says, but he was getting some marriage advice, and him and his wife were sitting there with a counselor and all, and they were talking about it, and they said, the counselor was asking the guy, said, what's wrong? What's your problem with this? He said, well, let me tell you something. Every time we're together, she just gets historical. He said, you mean hysterical? No, historical. She keeps reminding me of everything I've ever done. There are a lot of people who will always keep reminding you of the mistakes that you have made over and over and over again. They won't let you get past your mistakes. Mercy is giving people what they need, not what they deserve. When somebody stumbles, you don't judge them, you encourage them. Mercy is treating people the way God treats you. Could you imagine if God brought up everything that we mess up on when we mess up every day? Aaron did the class Wednesday night, did a fantastic job on Wednesday night with the class. And he was kind of talking about that idea of forgiving each other. How many times should one forgive each other? And the idea is we mess up. But the reason that, Aaron brought up the hardest one to forgive sometimes is forgive yourself. But I think the reason that we can't forgive ourselves so many times is because so many people remind us of the things that we mess up with and keep planting that in our minds. Mercy is treating people the way that God treats us. Proverbs chapter 17, verse 9 says this, the Living Bible, love forgets mistakes. Nagging about them parts the best of friends. I love that translation. Love forgets mistakes. That's what is wise to do in a relationship, is to forget mistakes, because we all make them. Proverbs chapter 15 and verse 4 says, kind words bring life, but cruel words crush the spirit. So let me just be real with you, face about it. What do you need to stop bringing up with that person in your relationship? What do you need to let go? You just need to stop bringing it up. You see, if I'm wise, I won't do these things. And if I'm not going to hang on to your mistakes. There's one more, the sixth thing. The sixth seed of peace to plant in all of our relationships. Number 6, and this is wise. If you're wise, I won't despise our differences. If I'm wise, I won't despise our differences. You know, there is a huge difference between unity and sameness. We have somehow thought that unity was sameness. Unity is not sameness. And let me tell you something. Every congregation has a different personality. Every single congregation has a different personality. You might go to this congregation out here and visit them, and they just have, you know, they're just different. Them being different doesn't make them wrong. Just makes them different. Actually, you go there and they look at you and say, that guy's different. If they can put up with my differences, I can put up with theirs. I'm going to tell you, you cannot be in a room with the people like this and not know that there are a lot of differences in this congregation. There are a lot of different people. We don't need to despise our difference. Now, this is a big one because one of the biggest sources of conflicts in marriage and every other relationship is that we want and we expect other people to think like we do, to feel like we do, to act like we do, to have the same reasons and motivations that we do. We want them to have the same priorities that we do. I want them to have the same outlook that we do. I want them to have the same perspective that we do. We want them to judge everything the same way that we do. Now, what's the problem here? We don't want them to be who God made them to be. We want them to be who we want them to be. That's a formula for conflict. That's a huge formula for conflict in a relationship. That's a formula for unhappiness, and it is a formula for disaster. Now, the antidote is simply to wisely admit our own biases, our own judgments, our own prejudices. And that's why the last seed of peace that James recommends that you plant is peace in a peaceful relationship is to be a peacemaker in this world is this. Real wisdom, James 3:17, is free from prejudice and hypocrisy. That's today's English version. Real wisdom is free from prejudice and hypocrisy. Now, if I'm hypocritical and if I'm prejudicial, at this point I'm a fool. That's what he says. I'm not being wise. It's the opposite of being wise. Now, the interesting thing is this phrase is free from prejudice and hypocrisy. In the original Greek, two words are very, very similar, and they go together. They're actually even sound alike, a lot alike. It's the Greek word that the words, and don't judge me on this. I'm not a good Greek. I should have just taught. We got several here that could do that better than I can. But the word is adikritos and anipokritos. I think that's how you pronounce it. They mean no hidden prejudice, no hypocrisy. Wouldn't it be helpful if we were all that wise? Free from prejudice, free from hypocrisy. I mean, anipokritos. You can hear that in the word hypocrite is there. 1 Peter chapter 2:17 says it this way. Show proper respect to everybody. Everybody's not going to be the same as you are. Antipokritos means not to be a hypocrite. The Greek word hypocrite the word hypocrite is a Greek word. In a Greek theater, thousands of years ago, they would have an actor to come up, and he would wear a mask, and he would betray a particular character in a Greek theater. And this particular character, he'd go backstage, and he'd switch masks, he'd come out, he'd portray another character. Then he'd go backstage, he'd put on another mask, he'd come out and portray another character. And he would wear multiple masks throughout the story, and he was called hypocritus because he always wore a mask. He was a hypocrite. He was always pretending. He was always wearing a mask. Wise people just said they're adiakritos, which means free from prejudice. Now, what does that mean? They don't despise differences. They celebrate differences. Just because someone's different from you doesn't make it bad. By the way, I want to tell you parents something. Pick your battles with your kids. There's going to be a lot more things to fight about than purple hair. There's going to be a lot more things to fight about than a tattoo. There's a whole lot more important things to worry about than whatever these things are that you think so important. Pick your battles with your kids. You might not like their purple hair, but they might not like your haircut. And they may be right. So they put up with you, you need to put up with them. Just because they're different from you doesn't make it bad. Everything that's different isn't demonic. It's just different. And wise people see God's wisdom in making us all different. Again, Romans chapter 15, verse 17, accept each other then, just as Christ accepts you, in order to bring praise to God. Isn't that a great verse? We need to accept, again, you don't have to have in a church 3 songs of prayer, song, Lord's Supper, song, sermon. You don't have to have the Lord's Supper. I'm glad I'm not in a congregation like that, by the way. This congregation is not that way. But I've been in congregations where if you would have moved the Lord's Supper to the first of the service like we did when COVID hit, and try to make adjustments for things, they would pitch a fit. You can't do that. Why? Because you're supposed to sing it after the 3rd song. Everybody knows that. And this, or even not having Sunday night services. Where did we get Sunday night services from in the beginning? But I came from, I remember, boy, you had to be here 3 times a week, and Sunday night was, you had to be here for Sunday night service. Well, that's fine. I believe if the church meets on Sunday night, you need to be there. I think you ought to be on life group, by the way, but because that's what we have here. But Sunday night services, who decided Sunday night services in the first place? We did. It's the Lord's Day. It doesn't say the Lord's Sunday night services. You know why Sunday night service came about in the first place? During the Industrial Revolution, the invention of lights, there were shifts that were working all the time, and the cities were able to light up the cities, and so they were able to have Sunday night service for the people who were having to work, and so they had it, and it became and it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad tradition, but it is a tradition. And it's one that we created. If we could create it, we could change it. Wednesday night, Bible classes. Do you know that we weren't the ones that invented Bible classes? It was the denominations. They came up with it first. And when it first came out, we were opposed to it. As a matter of fact, I lived in a place in Alabama that was anti-Sunday school. And the reason they were anti-Sunday school because that was a divided assembly. And so I asked him, of course I met with a guy one time, we were talking about it from that particular congregation. I said, well, if I come to church and I meet you out there in the parking lot before church service, we get there, say you and I show up, I like to be early. My wife doesn't, but I do. So we'll get there, and I'll get there 30 minutes early, and I see you in the parking lot, and I walk over and I say, hey, how you doing? He said, well, get in the car and let's talk. We got in the car, and you bring up a Bible topic, and we get to talking about it. Somebody else pulls in the parking lot, and they walk up and say, what are y'all talking about? Well, we're talking about a Bible topic. Well, get in the car, we'll talk about it. Then church, we've just had a Bible class, whether you like it or not. Eating in the building. I remember when that was a big deal. Oh, my goodness. As a matter of fact, if you'll find a Church of Christ that was in the 1950s, early 60s and everything, that has a fellowship hall, one thing you'll note about that fellowship hall is not connected to the building. There's always a thing across to it. Why? You can't eat in the building. So, that's not really part of the building. That's how we justified it. Because you weren't supposed to, because they got from 1 Corinthians, have you not houses to eat and drink in, you can't eat in the building, all that. But what I'm saying is we do things different, and we get in an uproar, and we think, oh, that's so bad. But we've always been that way. We've never been open to something new. But I'm telling you, he says wisdom, a wise person will accept things. We think different, we look different, we talk different, and we're different values and different priorities. We have different skills. We don't all like to do the same things. And a lot of times we let things get undone in the world because we can't cooperate. The first mark of this part of being wise as a peacemaker is you're free from prejudice. Why don't you ask God to help you to become free from prejudice this week? And you say, well, I'm not a racist. I didn't say you were. You're not a racist, but everybody has prejudices. Everybody has prejudices. Everybody has biases. You can't be a human being and not have a bias. I prefer ketchup on my steak. Some of you said, no. No, it's got to be A1 or it's got to, we're all different. I'm biased towards certain things. I happen to be partial to, I think I have the best grandchildren in all the world. Now, Lillian, would you agree with that? Because she's got a grandbaby. What about you, Terry? No. Just saying. So how can we get along with each other if we disagree so much? I'll go back to 3 weeks ago. You'd be wrong if you want to be. No. But we all are different, and we all have our partialities, and we all have our biases, and we all do those things. You see things, we see things in a different way. We're different from each other. Other people who see things in that way, and if we don't get it together, it just creates a conflict. But God says, I love all the differences. And he says, I want you to be free from prejudices. Any of y'all ever visited a black congregation? I wish we'd get more black. I mean, they're just there's a lot more excited. We're just more prim and proper. Different. I wonder how many of you, this congregation, wouldn't be that much, but if you go in and people raising hands everywhere, would you have a problem with that? It used to be a time when I would. Well, why? Because I'm just not used to it. Actually, it's probably more biblical. The Bible says, I would that all men everywhere pray, lifting holy hands. But when things happen and we're not used to it, he says, I want you to be free from prejudices. And then the second thing he says, I want you to be genuine, authentic, honest. They don't fake it. They're not hypocritical. He says it's dumb to pretend that you're somebody that you're not. It's even more dumb, it's even more foolish to pretend you're perfect. That's foolish. Why? Because everybody already knows that you're not perfect if they've been around you very long. I mean, who do you think you're fooling? You're not fooling God, and you're not fooling everybody else. People actually appreciate honesty more than they do trying to pretend. And you're trying to pretend that you've got it all together. And when you're honest with other people, when you're free from hypocrisy and prejudice, they're open. They're honest about your faults. If you're open and honest, it makes them more open to you. Now here's my homework for this week. Talk to somebody different from you this week. Try to get their perspective. Somebody of a different culture, a different age, a different religion, a different race. Become wiser. Don't try to solve anything. Just listen and learn and love. Use your ears, not your mouth. Now, these 6 different seeds of peace, how do you rate on James' wisdom test? You say, well, not so good. Well, I need more wisdom. Well, yeah, we all do. We all need more wisdom. That's the starting point. Admit that you need it. Until you admit it, you're not going anywhere. How do you get more wisdom? Here's the secret. Get to know God and get to know His Word. Get to know God and get to know His Word. The more you know God and the more you know His Word, the wiser you're going to become, the more seeds of peace you'll plant, and the more fulfilling and successful your relationships are going to be. How do I get that wisdom? Well, you start with step number 1. You get to know Jesus. Look at this verse, the last verse in our outline, Colossians chapter 2 and verse 3. The secret is Christ Himself. In Him lies hidden all God's treasures of wisdom. The secret to what? Wisdom. The secret to wisdom is Christ Himself. In Him lies all the God's hidden treasures of wisdom. The secret to wisdom is not a principle, it's a person, it's Jesus Christ. And whatever you need wisdom, He's got all your needs. If you want peace in your relationship, if you want peace in this world, the starting point is to try to invite the Prince of Peace, that's Jesus Christ, into your life. If you haven't done that, I want to invite you to do that this morning. It's a starting point to the path to wisdom. It's a starting point to harmony and peace in your relationship. If you've had a bad relationship in your life, this is the starting point. Start getting the wisdom of God in your life by inviting Christ into your life. If you're here this morning, you believe in Christ, you're willing to turn from your sins, confess your faith, be baptized for the remission of your sins, you'll put on Jesus Christ. It is, what did He say? The secret is Christ Himself. There's where it is. In Him lies God's treasures. All God's treasures of wisdom. If you're here this morning, maybe you need the prayers of the church. Whatever your need might be, I want to encourage you as we stand, we offer the invitation.